you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Beliefs expressed on the following program by the host, guests, or callers are not necessarily the opinions of FantasyXS.com, Media Group Inc. ownership, management, sponsors, or website. Time for an hour of hardcore hoops with the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro. There's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Let's get to the show basketball fans crave. Let's get inside the paint.
Good Wednesday morning, everybody. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman there. Time to talk a lot of heat here on Inside the Paint. And Ira, we talked a little bit before during the crossover about, what we thought about, how do I put this? The fact that this blue collar mentality that Milwaukee has and how people there really embraced Bobby Portis. And I feel like in many ways, kind of removing, what the town is, I feel like that's what the Heat need to get back to this season in order to get to where they want to be. Certainly you've got the stars and Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, an all-star, Kyle Lowry, somebody who's won a championship before. But they need to get that mentality back. It's something that I think they lost a bit last year. And so I want to kind of use that to transition into what I think is the main topic that we're going to talk about today, which is, who is the most important player on this Miami Heat team? We got a lot we want to get to today, but I want to start there because I feel like that generated some good chatter, some good back and forth on Ask Ira this week. So I've got a few different thoughts on this, but if I just throw that question out to you, just blanket ask you, who is the most important player on this Heat team for the 2021-2022 season? Your answer is what?
I guess I would look at it this way. I would look at who on this team has a skill set that can't be replicated elsewhere. In other words, you can say certain guys can be playmakers, but he also can play make. Certain guys can score, but he also can score. No one else on the Heat, and perhaps, Clay, no one else in the NBA does what Bam Adebayo does. But here's my question about all that, because I think it's a two-part answer here. No one does what Bam does, but is what Bam does asking too much from him, becoming too big a part of this team, his switchability on defense, his able to do everything on offense. And so when you go to the question always of who's your team's most important player, it's usually someone who has a definitive standalone skill that you can say of this player, well, he is great at this. Duncan Robinson is great at shooting. Kyle Lowry is great at stepping up in clutch moments. Jimmy Butler is great at being the tough guy. And yet, if you ask me about Bam Adebayo, and you said, Ira, what's great about Bam Adebayo? I'm not sure I can fill any particular box, Clay. I love his versatility on defense, but is that greatness? I love that he's able to generate offense to a degree that he can follow up, he can score inside, he can hit the short jumper, but he doesn't do anything great. So that's why I think Bam Adebayo is the Heat's most important player, because most importantly, he has to continue to grow. But Eric Spoelstra, maybe I'm wrong, Clay, maybe you disagree. It seems like the fulcrum on both ends of the court are built around Bam Adebayo. Jimmy will give you what he can, but no one's expecting him to score. So you have that. Kyle Lowry's going to step in at moments of truth. But even the way he played in Toronto, he never wanted to overwhelm. He wanted DeMar DeRozan to have his moments. He wanted Pascal Siakam to be able to grow. He knew for players like Kawhi Leonard and Serge Ibaka they had to get their own. So to me, Bam is the most fascinating ongoing story of the season. Clay, I honestly think we could take a segment every week on this show to talk about Bam Adebayo and how his performance affects the overall performance, because I think he's the fulcrum to all of this. And yet I still, and I know it's not fair to him, I still want to see more.
You want to see more, in fewer areas, I think is what, and I think we talked about
specific areas. Yeah,
exactly. And by the way, I'm on board with that. I think I can agree and disagree. Where I agree is that I think he's spread a little too thin. I feel like, and we've talked about this before, that Pat Riley, like, you can take so many things out of what he says in his postseason news conferences or Zooms, whatever they are now.
Right.
And a lot of times it's big words that end up being played over and over again. I want to go get a whale. There are obstacles, but there are none, or whatever. But sometimes he makes very pointed comments that I think you take away and you kind of, you raise your eyebrow a little bit. And he said flat out that Eric Spoelstra was asking Bam to do too much. And I thought that was interesting, that it was a public pointed criticism of the head coach and his handling of an all-star player. Now, it wasn't done in a mean way. It wasn't done in an I know better than you way. It was, you can't ask Bam to be Giannis on one end of the floor and Nikola Jokic on the other end of the floor. And so what I would like to see with him is, I want to see him. I think where his greatness is, and this is where I would say I disagree. I think he is great defensively. I think what he does defensively, yes, he does a lot, but I also think that everything that he does really well. I think if you asked him to be strictly a rim protector, I think he would be elite at that. If you asked him to strictly be somebody who would go out and switch off and guard the smaller players, he would be great at that. And I think the thing that, you go back to last year, not this past season, but the previous year when they played the Bucks, where the Bucks really missed Giannis when he was hurt, and then also when he tried to play through the injury, was with his help defense. That's something that Bam is just incredible at. So from that perspective, I would say when you're talking about who is the Heat's most important player if this guy takes a leap, it's going to change this team. I would agree with you that it is Bam Adebayo. If he is able to figure out, okay, I don't have to be point center Bam anymore. In the half court. Right, 100%. And that's where I would say that's where Pat Riley's criticism was. But if he can go back, like, try to be Serge Ibaka. When Ibaka was really, really good offensively. Right. I'm not talking about when he was working with Kyle Lowry, it was phenomenal. And Lowry says, I want him to be Superman. So from that perspective, Ira, I would take Bam as far as who needs to take a leap.
Clay, except, although those are very good points for a TV guy, but I would, but I would say this.
That is the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
But I would say this. Pat Riley has often said about what he might do different than Eric Spoelstra. Remember a couple of years ago, we asked him about Bam playing with Hassan. And he said, I don't see why not. They can do things. We'll have to have, I forgot what the word was, a summit or a conference or whatever.
Oh, that's right.
Remember that?
It was a summit.
With Eric, we'll have to bring them together. This one was when Hassan was still here and he was banging heads with Eric Spoelstra.
That's right.
And it never happened. I mean, people kept talking about that. Well, when's that going to happen? And it sort of went away. It really is interesting to me because usually what's happened in recent years is Pat has his season ender and Eric doesn't. Eric has always been about moving on to the next thing. The only thing Eric Spoelstra, after that Game 4 loss against the Bucks, has spoken to the general media since has been when he went to coach the Olympic select team. Otherwise, really no comments on last season or honestly about this season's rework roster also. So it almost seems like it happens that Pat makes a comment or makes a point, and then it sort of gets lost in the ether. And it goes away. So I am curious when Eric does his season opening session, whether it's a session at FTX Arena, whether it's another Zoom because of the pandemic or something, if he does address that about Bam, and to go to that point, will he be more willing to go big with Bam? Because right now the roster really isn't built this way. There's not another Hassan. There is basically PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris, it looks like, as the power forward rotation to start the season, both somewhat undersized for that role. There is the intrigue of Dwyane Dedmon, who I think played 1 minute with Bam since he arrived last season. And even we've spoken about our show during the summer about Omar Yurtseven and how he does make the outside shot. Maybe not Kelly Olynyk 2.0, but he can do that also. So I do wonder, and this is why I think it's important, and not to be too long-winded here for Print Guy, but this is why I think it's interesting that people who talk about that the Heat is of one mind and one thought, and Pat is sort of the head of the snake, not always. Pat has offered us a lot of thoughts in recent years about what he thinks Eric should do. but Eric still has the autonomy to do what he wants to do. So I'm going to throw it back at you. Do you think we'll see Big, or knowing Eric Spoelstra as you know him and as you followed him, over this last decade or so, do you think by now Eric Spoelstra has basically told us that doesn't work in today's NBA? The moment that I got rid of Joel Anthony and Eric Dampier and Ronny Turiaf and moved Chris Bosh to center, I was set in that direction. Clay Ferraro, what are the chances of seeing Big this season?
I think you're going to see it. I don't think you're going to see it very much. I think it's going to be situational. And, you go back to the Milwaukee series where it was an absolute unmitigated disaster as far as the, So I think you're going to see it in those scenarios because the guys that you have that are, stretch players or whatever, with most teams, you can go out there and say, okay, I'm going to force you to adjust to me. And I feel like that's kind of what Eric Spoelstra wanted to do a lot of times by playing, smaller lineups. I think we saw in the Milwaukee series it didn't work. And so I think that what you're going to see is the adjustment being made that you're not going to be quite as stubborn about it. Like when you go out there and you realize, okay, this isn't working, then you're going to have the options to be flexible and try to find ways to make it work. So I think you'll see it. I think you'll see it in small doses.
No, you won't. You don't
see that at all. Not at all.
Remember, there was that one season Bam and Hassan played like 13 minutes together all season. And last season when Dwyane Dedmon arrived, still, with almost a month to go in the regular season, we barely saw it. And I think Eric Spoelstra has a wonderful stubbornness. Because when you're stubborn, you sort of have a limited vision of what you want to do, and you try to excel in that. So I am curious if Pat can influence him when it comes to that, or his other coaches, or maybe what other teams did going a little bit bigger during the playoffs. Look at the Lakers. The Lakers have gone out and brought in Dwight Howard. They brought in DeAndre Jordan, who I think we all agree are sort of fossils and dinosaurs.
Right.
But they believe to protect Anthony Davis, they're willing to go big. So the question is, does Bam need protection or not? Or at 24 years old, is he young enough that he's able to stand up to the beating and that's what they want him to do? So I am curious about how he's going to handle Bam this season, the Pat Riley influence there, whether we'll see experimentation, going to play a full 6-game preseason schedule, Clay. There certainly is time for the first time in an offseason to experiment, or whether Spoelstra, stubborn Spoelstra continues on.
Two Extreme says Bam's biggest problem is he's not aggressive, needs to assert his force on opponents. Everything else is good enough except his three-point shooting, but that may be asking too much of a big man. Now, I would say, I agree. I would say that we've seen big men, and somebody that we're going to talk about later on the program, Chris Bosh, develop that three-point shot, and especially that corner three-pointer. And what that does is it helps with spacing quite a bit. And it would allow you to go big, because you can have Bam still space the floor a little bit. Now, that's not something that you want to ask him to do a lot of, because he has so many other really, really nice skills in his skill set. But so I would agree up to that point. I'd like to see him develop that shot a little bit. So I'm going to switch around the question a little bit.
Okay.
As far as who's the most important player. So that was, from my perspective, who needs to take a leap? Who needs to change their game, whether it's, in his case, focusing on certain areas to become the most important player. If there were one player that I would tell you the Heat would go 2 months without, who is the one player that they could not afford to lose for that stretch?
I'm still not so sure it's not Bam, because who are you really filling in? A rookie in Omer Yurtseven, an old player in Dwyane Dedmon? Are you playing incredibly small? So I'd say that's number one. But if you want me to sort of move off the grid into a different player, I'm not so sure without Duncan Robinson's spacing and someone to hit threes that you have a threat. When you were even talking about Bam there getting the three-point shot or someone else, part of gravity is not only being able to do it, but having the respect of the opponent that you always will do it. So if Bam steps out for the three, opponents might go, okay, prove it to us. We'll let you have 4 threes today. Same thing with Dwyane Dedmon and Omer Yurtseven. That's fine. The ball's not in the hands of Jimmy Butler. Then the ball's not in the hands of Kyle Lowry. But without Duncan Robinson out there, there's one point that he had all kinds of three-point shooting. That is not that point right now. I don't know if this offense, the way it's been designed to this point, can survive it. And that, Clay, in summation, is why they gave him $90 million over 5 years, because they realized how irreplaceable he was.
And I can understand that. I keep it really simple. It's who's the best player on this team. And so I'm going Jimmy Butler. I know it's so easy, but
you're right. The 10 games he missed last season, that was the seeding. That was playing Milwaukee in the first round as opposed to hosting the Knicks or the Hawks in the first round. So you're right. That 10-game COVID span turned the season upside down.
And so let me ask this one more way, because when you sent me this question, I had 3 different answers for 3 different reasons. And this is why I'm asking it to you this way. And I'm going to give you my answer for this one just to get your take on it, because I want to make sure that I'm phrasing this the right way. But as far as who's the most important player, I'm going to say X factor. Like, who is the player that if he goes out there, you can see this team elevating a level? And for me, it's Victor Oladipo.
Yes,
it's the fact that, hey, and I'm not even saying that he has to be better than the Victor. If he can get anywhere near, and it doesn't even have to be all NBA third team Victor Oladipo, the All-Star. I feel like, man, and this is what hurt so bad seeing him get hurt last year was, like, you started to see him getting close to the type of player that the Heat would need to get to that next level. You don't rely on him. I don't think you need him to be a bucket getter consistently. What I think you need him to do is be that menace defensively that he started to be. Be the guy that when you put him on the floor with Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry and Bam Adebayo, and then pick your big, whether it's PJ Tucker, like, you're talking about a defensive lineup that may be the best in the NBA when you throw those 5 out there, but he has to be healthy. And that's when we come back after this break on Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint, I think that goes to another player also. If you haven't gone to your Instagram page yet, take a look at Tyler Hero, because, Clay, I agree that Victor Oladipo can be imperative unless Tyler Hero steps up to a level that you have full confidence that, hey, he's our third guard, he makes it work. So I think that's something I want to get into after the break, and go to his Instagram page and check out them muscles. Not a bad tease.
Reach out to Ira and Clay. Drop them an email at insidethepaint@yahoo.com. Chime in on the YouTube chat board. You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines. If you're a Miami sports fan, then there's only one store to go to, and that's Caneswear at Miami Fanwear in Davie. They're your one-stop shop for all your inner Miami CF, Canes, Dolphins, Panthers, and Marlins merchandise. They have hats, t-shirts, game day jerseys, and so much more. Located at 2511 South University Drive in Davie, and open 24/7 online at caneswear.com or innermiamiwear.com. Call them at 954-835-5597. Caneswear, the spot where Inner Miami and all Miami sports fans shop.
This is the Big O Show. 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 This is the Big O Show.
When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Welcome back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro. Let's get back to the guys that just updated their email from Prodigy to AOL. Here's Ira and Clay.
Welcome back to Inside the Paint, and we'll get to your chat topics, your questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat right here. We'll get to them as we go along. Jeremiah said Oladipo, if he could ever stay healthy, he would be legit. Absolutely, and I think that's where kind of you're hoping, if you're a Heat fan, that he can just get to that spot, and then whatever he can give you at that point, you'll take. Ira, I will say, I think it was a real shame. I had a much higher opinion of Tyler Hero than this. I thought that I didn't think he would stoop this low as to Photoshop his face on your body. I just thought, man, look at that. Like, did he ask your permission to do that? Like,
for those people listening on the podcast or just on the stream, Clay just held up Tyler Hero's latest Instagram post that basically, if you didn't know better, and if the skin tone was different, you would have thought it was Tyler Hero's head on Alonzo Mourning's body, because the arms are rippling from what you can see below the jersey, and that is his chest tattoo, so it looks like it actually is him and the legs.
Oh, I thought that was yours. That's what I was going to say. Is
yes.
Like, it was so obvious. Oh,
that was me. That was me 20 years ago, when even before I did my radio segments, I would baby oil up. Yes, that's true. But that's my Lou Ferragamo or whatever his name was, Lou Ferrigno days, or Arnold Schwarzenegger days. But what Tyler Hero has posted on his Instagram, he told us, or he told the Heat beat writers at the Heat camp this year, he wanted to bulk up. He didn't want to get pushed around. He understood people were coming after him after what he did against the Celtics 2 years ago in the run to the NBA Finals, that he was a marked man. And he posted today or overnight on Instagram this unbelievable bodybuilder look that a lot of the comments on that Instagram post said, okay, drug test is coming up next, because we know while the NBA is not checking for marijuana anymore, they still are for steroids. Not going to go there with that. There's still time before they report to camp. If Tyler Hero is as physical and muscled as he shows in that photo, if that indeed is, and it looks like by all accounts it is his body, then he has put in the work this summer. And for all the detractors, including people like me who said he's too involved in marketing and social media and everything, it shows you can be everything. You can go out and do that. You can be with the Olympic select team, and you can be in the gym, all while being an expected father also. And he's checked all the boxes. But if he does come back like a physical player, thank you, Big O, who put up it for us on Instagram. For those people watching us on YouTube now or catching us on the stream later, you can see what he looks like. I'm not so sure about the legs bent outward, but he knows how to shoot a lot better than Ira Winderman does. And Clay, if the commitment to body is there and the commitment to game is there, you mentioned on the last segment how you thought Victor Oladipo was one of the most important surprise players. Well, if Tyler Hero steps in and he's your third guard, and you're running with the starting wing rotation of Duncan Robinson, Jimmy Butler, and Kyle Lowry, and you have this Tyler Hero pictured right here in front of us as your other third guard, you might be set anyway without Vic, and that's just a bonus. So, yeah, I do agree. I think Tyler Hero is a swing player, and as you mentioned in our crosstalk, Big O, and you can mention that again, he signed his rookie extension. Now comes the rookie scale, rather signed his rookie option. Next summer comes the rookie scale extension. So the Heat have a big decision coming up with Tyler Hero.
Yeah, and let's go back to something we said in the last segment about Bam Adebayo, that I feel like Bam was being asked to do too much. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're a great coach, you find a way to put your players in positions to succeed. You find out what they do well. I feel like part of Tyler Hero's, if you want to call it regression, if you want to call it non-progression last season, I think everybody was expecting him to take a leap after what we saw in the bubble. I think trying to make him a point guard really hurt. And it just felt like he was out there thinking too much instead of just playing. And we hear that all the time about athletes, that if you think, you're lost. Like, if you can't just react and go, you're lost. So if I'm Eric Spoelstra, I would love to see this. Just go out there and be a bucket. Just go out there and score. And obviously, look, you put on the size. I think that's significant. Like you said, he says he doesn't want to be pushed around anymore. That's talking about defense. And, man, you go back to I'll never forget during the Pacers series in the bubble, he said very clearly, look, we know that they're going after Duncan and me. We know that. And I think what he's doing at this point is making it, hey, sure, you may be able to get around me. You may be able to but you're not going to push me around anymore on defense. So that's on that end of the floor. This is a positive sign, right? And I know everybody posts stuff on social media all the time, but Tua Tagovailoa did it all. But that doesn't mean, like you said, you can have it all. You can be doing that at the same time, getting better. So as far as Tyler Hero, the player goes, Ira, I need to see him going back out there and scoring. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. Just be a bucket, be a scorer, and make sure that you're doing the best you can to stay in front of guys on defense. But go back to being a bucket. Forget about being a point guard.
Well, here's the thing about the Heat salary structure. It's one thing when you are loaded with big contracts, when you are the Brooklyn Nets and you have the extensions with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, the big deal you signed a year ago with Joe Harris, and you're lined up with your contracts. You're a leading contender. You're playing for a championship. Your time is now and you pay. Let's look at the Heat next summer, Clay, because I'm going to put you on the spot here in a couple of seconds. The Heat salary structure right now, you have Jimmy Butler with his 5 years remaining at $220 million. You have Kyle Lowry with his 3 years at $85. You have Bam Adebayo starting his 5-year, $164 million extension. We spoke in the last segment about Duncan Robinson and his 5-year, $90 million deal. Very hard to go with more than 5 huge contracts in the NBA salary cap and luxury tax world. So I'm going to put you on the spot right here, Clay Ellisberg, okay? You have to make a decision after the season. Tyler Hero has a really good season, goes back to rookie Tyler Hero, second half of the season, and Victor Oladipo returns to Victor Oladipo, Indiana Pacers era. Let me ask you this. Understanding their age, understanding what they can do, their two-way skills, which might tilt it a little toward Vic. If you then had to sit in the office with Adam Simon and Pat Riley and Nick Harrison next summer and say, we are loaded with 4 large contracts. We have room for one more. Tyler had a good season. Vic had a good season. So, Clay Ellisberg, what direction would you go in that scenario?
So, the thing that's tough is making this decision in a vacuum. So, let me put it this way. By the end of the season, if all of those things happen, then I would need to also know that Jimmy Butler is still Jimmy Butler. And, he's doing what he's doing. Kyle Lowry is able to be the Kyle Lowry that we've seen the last few years. So let's say everything else is as good as it could be. In other words, you're not losing Jimmy Butler's defensive acumen, all that. Then I'm leaning towards Tyler. Because, like you said, you've got the two-way, you've got guys that can play a lot of defense. But what I think you're missing is like that true elite bucket getter. And if that's what Tyler is growing into, like if by the end of the year, you're starting to see him turn into the guy consistently that we saw for stretches in the bubble, I just think there's a value there that you don't find that. And it's something that he'd have been looking for a long time. So to me, that would be the higher value point. The other one that would play into it is, okay, if Vic is close to who Vic was before, he still has that injury history. And so there would still be that concern to me that, he would suffer another minor thing that would turn into a major thing. So if all those things happen, if everything else stays equal, and you're telling me that both Tyler Hero and Victor Oladipo are getting closer to what their ceiling could be, I would lean towards Tyler for all those reasons that I said.
And yet here's what's interesting. So if you even start to get that sense during the first half of the season, and you approach the NBA trading deadline, and you realize, because here's the other part of that, Clay. For at least the next 2 years after this, which is Kyle Lowry's contract, you're probably looking at Duncan Robinson, Kyle Lowry, and Jimmy Butler as your perimeter rotation. So you're probably talking about Tyler Hero or Victor Oladipo at best as a sixth man. A lot of money to spend for a sixth man to start getting into that $20 to $30 million salary range and not having your starting lineup. So you have that to look at. Maybe Kyle ages out, finishes his 3-year run at 38, he's done. So I could see that. You get to the trading deadline. Victor Oladipo has been back for a month, for 6 weeks, and my God, he looks like Victor Oladipo. Tyler Hero comes out, He's a new father. He's grounded. He's been fantastic as instant offense. Forget everything else. Wow, this guy's giving you 16 points off the bench in limited bench minutes. It's easier to trade Tyler because he's under contract.
It's true.
He's on the rookie scale, and another team can do the extension in the offseason. Vic is just a minimum scale guy who's going to become a free agent in the offseason. Yes, you'll get his bird rights in a deal, but he can't bring you value back on a $1.7 million value in a trade. So that's an interesting part also. Yes, we are getting way ahead of ourselves. We've seen the reports. We've seen his workouts about what Vic has done. But just as Big O has left this picture on our side here of Tyler Hero working out in the shape he's been in, I'm going to ask you part B of that equation, Clay Ferraro, television person, is this. Because, again, we all love the visual. I know that's more of your job to see the visual. When you see Victor Oladipo's workouts, when you see him grinding in the gym and you see everything that he's doing, and you mentioned a great point about Tua last offseason, looked like, an Adonis or whatever, not a Udonis, an Adonis. It looks so good there. How much stock are you putting into Victor Oladipo's Instagram and Twitter off-season workout videos?
Oh, I don't. I don't put any stock in any of that stuff. As great as Tyler Hero, as much as he looks like you in that picture, I don't know that he's going to go out there and his game is going to change yet. I want to see now. To be fair, Tua Tagovailoa, what we've seen from him since he's come back is like he looks like a different player. He looks like a stronger player. So
Right.
maybe it's a case-by-case basis, but I don't simply look at the offseason workout videos or pictures and say, okay, he's working hard. Like I feel like every athlete to some level is likely doing something like that. So what I like about Tyler Heroes is that you can see him putting on size, and that was something that was a problem before, was that he was getting pushed around. With Victor Oladipo, I love that he's out there and he's able to, even if you have an injury, and I'm nowhere near the athlete, not pretending to be, but I've torn meniscus, stuff like that before. You still need to work out everything around it so there's not atrophy. So I give Victor Oladipo a lot of credit that he's in there and he's doing everything that he needs to do.
And right now, for those catching us on YouTube, he's on the screen, and certainly that body is the body of an NBA-ready player.
100%.
But again, it's not a player running after quadricep surgery. It's not a player cutting. It's not a player. Remember the one play when it all ended last season, Clay, when he went for that dunk and he landed awkwardly, the kind of thing usually a player has a major knee injury when he has that kind of grimace on his face and he looks like that there. I thought you raised a really cogent point, though, in talking about the comparison, and that's this. And you've certainly been in the industry long enough to know this. At what point does a player simply become an injured player? Right. That even if he keeps working his way back, and I think this factored in with Dwyane Wade in 2016 also, when he had a split with the Heat, when he wound up going to Chicago, where the Heat wouldn't give him the maximum deal, similar to what Chris Bosh got. And I just wonder if that's part of the thinking also, that they gave him the minimum deal because they didn't know if he'll ever be all the way back. And that even if he does become Victor Oladipo, does he ever get back to the $122 million he bypassed from the Pacers, to the 80+ million he bypassed, or I think a little bit less than that, he bypassed from the Rockets when he could have extended before his trade to the Heat? So I think that is interesting, and Heat Nation knows plenty of these guys we've had over the years who you think they're back, they've turned the corner, but ultimately the first injury can lead to the second injury, the third and fourth, and you become who you are, and all of a sudden we're talking about load management and not the same. So I wonder if Heat Nation is willing to embrace Victor Oladipo or simply will enjoy the moments he can provide.
Yeah, and you mentioned it before, when you have other big contracts on the roster and guys who are older players, like, you need to have someone that you can count on their availability. And so, I just don't think that you can put a whole lot of money into those players. Too extreme. Tyler Hero might have been working out a little bit this offseason. Hopefully he rebounds this year and the muscles get his focus back on basketball, not about fame and glam. And I think as we transition, Ira, to the next segment, I want to get your thoughts on this. How much stock, because there's a difference between like what you can put out there reporting wise and what is just chatter, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. How much did you hear about what's been reported elsewhere about concerns with being too focused on stuff off the court, that sort of thing? Or is this something that was more kind of an excuse for what we saw on the court.
You know, I've had words twisted when I've addressed this before, and all I've said was this, and this was taken totally out of context, is if you're going to step out in the marketing realm, if you're going to become an online personality, if you're going to piggyback off of your girlfriend or the mother of your child now fame on Instagram, that's all well and good, but you have to understand expectations come with that. There are some players who step back from that, who say, I'm still a formative player. I'm still growing. I'm not going to have it all now. I'm going to take my steps. There's other players who leap right in from the moment he was drafted and the sports coat that he wore to the draft, and he announced, Tyler Hero is on the scene. This is me. Expect greatness. So all I said about that, when I talked about him having his own Chipotle bowl and everything else, was if you're going to go there, you have to back it up.
You're opening yourself up for criticism. You're opening yourself up.
What I'm saying, if you're going to start with fame and saying, I want fame and I embrace fame, then you have to embrace everything else that comes with it as well. That was my entire point there, and I still believe that when it comes to Tyler, it's not an act. Some players have done that. Some players have started from being a star and also started with greatness. Other players realized it could be a trap. You choose your own fate. You choose your own path. You choose your own destiny. That's what he's chosen. God bless him. But understand, you put eyes on you. You put my eyes on you. You put Clay's eyes on you. We're looking now. We want to see. You've announced yourself. Now you have to pronounce yourself in the games at the moments of truth. We certainly saw that in the 2020 playoffs. You know what? All I want now is more of the same.
And I'm glad you said, because there's a distinction here. And as we go to break, I'm going to ask this, because I haven't seen this reported anywhere, Ira, and tell me if I'm off base. The concerns have been, he may be going Hollywood, whatever. But were they ever rooted in the idea that, well, hey, he used to be earlier to the practice facility. Now he doesn't show up anymore. He's missing mandatory meetings. He's not going to weightlifting. Like, it never seemed to me like there was anything substantial behind some of this stuff. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but I never heard any specific examples of him slacking in any particular area relative to what he was doing before. So you're right.
Also, and we don't know also because of the circumstances and the pandemic, I'm not so sure that anyone was fully able to be as invested as his predecessors. Hopefully the time is coming now. And of course, after we come back from the break, I also want to talk, because Saturday is a huge day, and Clay will tell us why right now.
Talking about the predecessors, talking about the Heat stars of the past. And this is one of my favorite people that I've ever been around, Ira. So I want to talk about Chris Bosh. I want a little story time with Ira. I want you to tell us some good stories about Chris Bosh. I've got maybe not as good as you, because I wasn't around quite as, but he is one of my favorite people that I've ever been around in sports. So we'll talk about Chris Bosh, the soon-to-be Hall of Famer, coming up next on Inside the
You're
Paint.
listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a good rack? Pallet Rack City. Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available, from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends.
This is the Big O Show. 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 This is the Big O Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines.
When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. If it's hardcore hoops you desire, make sure you subscribe to the Big O Radio Show and never miss an episode of Inside the Paint. Let's get back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro.
Back here on Inside the Paint, and we didn't touch on the biggest news item as far as the Heat go in the last 24 hours, but got to put this out there. Congratulations to Mike Inglis retiring as the play-by-play voice on the radio for the Miami Heat. When I was over in Fort Myers and they had the Heat games over there, it was so cool to kind of have that local flavor, but somebody who not just called the game, but somebody who like had that emotion, and he just had these things that he would do, like when he would say that there was a foul upcoming, and he was just so sure that it was on the Heat's opponent, and they would just be shocked when they would call the foul. Like just so many things about him that when you want everything that you want a home broadcaster to be, things that you kind of relate to. So congratulations to Mike Inglis in his retirement.
And life will be a lot easier for NBA referees now because of that. Because I got to tell you, so many people who work for teams are very careful about that. Mike let you know what he thought about every single whistle. And I got a feeling sitting in home in Naples this season, he will be talking to his television and his radio saying very much the same.
And I think Barry Jackson reported that Jason Jackson is being mentioned as a potential replacement. Nothing set in stone yet, but we'll see the direction that goes. I want to talk about Chris Bosh because this is a big weekend for him, much deserved that he is entering the Basketball Hall of Fame. And Ira, I'm going to leave the floor to you here. Just some of your memories of Chris Bosh. I'll give you just mine. I didn't get to cover as much of the Big Three era as you did, but I'll never forget that. The thing about Chris Bosh, number one, the word that always comes to my mind when I hear Chris Bosh's name is wise. The guy just has a wisdom that I don't know that I ever remember coming across in all of my years in broadcasting and journalism. I'm not just talking about sports. There's just a wisdom there with him. I always felt like, Ira, when Chris Bosh spoke, that I learned something. It was not cliche. It was, you would learn. And then I remember the last year of the Big Three, like you just had this feeling that it felt like everybody was over the whole thing. But you would ask people in the locker room and you would always get the same canned cliche answer. Yes. But Chris Bosh didn't give it to you. Chris Bosh said, you know what? We're bored. Like and this was during the regular season. This was not the playoffs. This was, they were kind of going through the doldrums of the season. But I love that I always learned something from him and that you could trust what he said. And that was something that is, as somebody who covers the team, it's all you could ask for. But the floor is yours. I know you probably have
that's a really good point. And there's always two different views. And remember also Chris Bosh when he'd come in and we'd see his raw emotion, including when he's walking down toward the hallway a little bit and he's crying and he had to be uplifted by his teammates and things like that. So I think it's a case with Chris where we come in the locker room, we talk about a loss, and we'd ask Dwyane Wade, and Dwyane would go, don't worry about it. It's one of 82 games. We'll be fine. And you go, they were sort of perpendicular to each other. And you go to Chris's locker, and he was so raw and so emotional. Yeah. And it just meant so much to him at the moment that he would just tell you, this has got to change. Again, he got mocked along the way. From Skip Bayless and others because of his emotion, because he did collapse. There was a bad loss to Portland and they were on a losing streak, and he could be seen crying in the hallway going back to the locker room. It meant that much to him. We can't have it both ways, Clay. We can't rip our athletes for not caring enough and then rip them for caring too much. And the other thing I'd say about Chris is this. Sometimes it's hard to admit this, that you're not the smartest guy in the room. But any room that Chris was in, he was the smartest guy in the room.
Yes.
He was a Renaissance man. He said, I'm going to learn to play guitar, and all of a sudden was on stage 6 months later. He came to our market, realized how important it was to be bilingual, taught himself Spanish. All of a sudden, the local Spanish radio stations couldn't get enough of Chris Bosh, from Jose Pineda doing pregame shows to having someone else out there. He's freaking brilliant. For everyone who says, oh, you've got to stay in school because if you don't stay in school, you won't be a well-rounded person. Chris Bosh went to Georgia Tech for 1 season and has more of an education than I got after all my years of college and most of the players who were 4-year players also. Getting to this weekend, the one thing that really bothers me is this. Clay, you remember this. Chris Bosh was eligible 1 class earlier, but the Hall of Fame decided in a class that was going to be Kobe Bryant and was going to include Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan, that they were not going to have a big class. So Chris was asked basically to defer, wasn't even a finalist for the class of 2020. Clay, this Saturday, and let's be honest, as you will be watching the Hurricanes play Appalachian State, the NBA will have, the Hall of Fame will have its inductions on Saturday evening. 16 people are being inducted. If you can do the math, even if everyone limits themselves to a 10-minute speech, that ceremony will go on forever. And let's face it, because it's in Springfield, Massachusetts, home of the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, Paul Pierce is the star of the night. All the New Englanders will come there. All the New England media will be there. Even during COVID, they could just drive over. So I think it's going to turn into a little bit of a Paul Pierce weekend. I think it's really unfair to Chris Bosh.
Yeah, I agree. And it's unfortunate. Like, it almost would have been, as crazy as it sounds, it almost would have been more fair had they waited. By the way, if you're listening or watching, please hit the like button. It helps us out a lot. We really appreciate it. Yes, and it's a bummer because it just feels like that's been the story of Chris Bosh's career, that he's just been so underappreciated. And I don't know that matters to him. I think he's somebody who he sees the bigger picture more than just about everybody. And maybe it does. That maybe in a candid moment he would admit that it does. But like you said, there are so many interests that he has. And one of the stories that I like to tell, because this was funny, it was, I think, a couple of years after he retired, and he had just gone to do some broadcasting stuff with TNT. And I saw him out at an event. And just went up to him, just small talk afterward. And, I asked him, I said, hey, what'd you think of TNT? And he's like, oh, yeah, it was cool. Like, had a lot of fun hanging out with the guys and doing that or whatever. And I kind of I asked, I was like, oh, so do you think that's something that you might like to do? And Ira, he was so nice in saying this because obviously he knew that I did TV. He was so nice in saying this, but he basically said in the nicest way possible, yeah, I got a lot more important things to do with my life. And I was like, he was so, he didn't want to sound like he was insulting the profession, and he didn't. But he's just somebody that, I mean, if the man ran for president in 5 years, if you told me he was going to run for president in 5 years, I'd say, okay, he's going to be he's going to be in the White House. And so I think the guy can do whatever he wants. I do think it's a shame, and this is the latest example of it, of somebody who I think deserved more than he got as far as recognition and his career goes.
Yes, and it's interesting. I just posted a story at sunsentinel.com, hopefully to be in tomorrow's paper, I asked Chris about coaching. We've seen some guys, former Heat players, Dwyane Howard most notably, but even now, Caron Butler, Malik Allen, come back to the team and work as a coach. And Chris said, I'm not going to close that door or any door, including front office, but I want to be a father first, and there's so much more I want to do also. So he wasn't demeaning the profession in the story I posted at sunsentinel.com. He was just saying it's just one of my many options and one of the things I can do. And it's interesting now because we see on the side here, for those watching on YouTube, some of Chris's highlights and what he's done. And Clay, I think we would both agree Chris Bosh was not the greatest player ever to wear the Miami Heat colors. Certainly Dwayne Wade is there, maybe not even number 2 with LeBron James. But let me ask you this. Iconic Heat moments, if when they get a year from now to their 35th team anniversary, and you and Local 10 and Will Mansour are putting together your top 10 all-time Heat moments, Chris Bosh's rebound and pass out to Ray Allen for the tying three-pointer at the end of regulation of the 2013 NBA Finals, win that Game 6, win Game 7. And I know I hate when I do this to people also when I'm on radio and I ask them to name their greatest whatever, and in one moment they have to think about it. Is there a more iconic or significant Heat moment than that play, especially now with Ray Allen standing alongside Chris Bosh this Saturday in Springfield, him and Pat Riley presenting him greatest Heat play of all time? Where would you put Chris Bosh's rebound and pass out to Ray Allen?
Oh, it's number one. Talking about the whole play. I mean,
yes.
it's not even close. I don't think. But I would say this too. I would say that I think Chris Bosh, the block on Danny Green, right? Like stuffing him at the end of overtime. That's something that's underrated. I don't think that gets enough pub. And I remember Eric Spoelstra saying this. It was shortly after I got here. He said, yeah, Chris Bosh is not our best player, but he is our most important player.
Yes.
And this was the big three. And this kind of gets back to the question we had at the opening of the show.
Absolutely.
So Chris Bosh did some things that if you took him off the floor, the word you used is fulcrum to describe Bam Adebayo. And I think in many ways he was. I would also say this. I don't know that there are a whole lot of bigger regular season moments than his three-pointer against the Trailblazers. And look, if you're a Heat fan, you don't care much about the regular season. You care about the playoffs. But yeah, if you're going through the moments in Heat history, Chris Bosh's name just comes up over and over and over again. And so I feel like it's another one of those examples, Ira, of somebody that I think Heat fans have a greater and more accurate appreciation for him than the national media do, than I think basketball fans at large do. In many ways, I think some people view him as kind of riding the coattails of LeBron and Dwyane Wade.
And that's why I'm curious
I don't think they would good without him.
And I'm curious also, therefore, where do they place him among the speakers? Will he be a final speaker? Will he be a first speaker? Will he be buried behind Tony Kukoc or Chris Webber or Cotton Fitzsimmons or others, Rick Adelman, who's being honored? I'm kind of curious about his placement because let's face it, I'm going to be honest, and I'm sure you're the same unless you're actually going to the game, is I'm going to have two TVs on. Yeah. And until Chris Bosh goes on, I'm watching the UM game. I'm going to be watching my college football anyway. The other guys, yeah, whatever. Tony Kukoc, okay, Scottie Pippen wouldn't take the shot, so we had to take this. I get all that. I get all the history. Chris Webber is interesting. So many people are questioning Chris Bosh as being a Hall of Famer. Oh, he rode the coattails. I look at Chris Webber more questionable as a guy who never won anything of substance, anything of note. And yet what you pointed out about the Portland shot, it was the moments when Dwyane and or LeBron weren't available. Chris had a big shot against the San Antonio Spurs. Chris had a huge game against the Atlanta Hawks when both LeBron and Dwyane were out. That it took those moments for him to have a singular moment because he was such a willing team player that he gave up and subjugated so much of his game in order for the collective to help the team win. That should be rewarded. That should be honored. I can't stand the people who question about riding coattails. To me, it's the same argument as saying Phil Jackson rode Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant's coattails and Shaq's to win his championship, or Eric Spoelstra's not a Hall of Fame coach because he hasn't won except when he had the big three. We have seen plenty of big threes since. We've seen plenty of compendium of players, including what Brooklyn tried to do with Pierce and Kevin Garnett and Darren Williams, not succeed. Just because you have the talent around you, alongside of you, playing for you, doesn't make it an automatic. Chris is the kind of guy who showed you have to be able to meld it all together. You have to be the person who helps it all coalesce. That's what made him incredibly special. That's why he deserves Saturday's moment. But that's why he deserves more than being clumped in with, here's a bunch of people, 16 people. I mean, you're talking about the Veterans Committee. You're talking about, from pre-NBA and the Black History movement and players from there also, and the women's game and international. And I understand all of that. But it's just a shame Chris, once again, his entire career gets lost in the sauce.
Good luck to whoever has to follow him speaking, by the way. You say you don't know, you don't know where he's going to speak. But
remember when his jersey was retired? Just fantastic. Yeah.
Good luck. Good luck to whoever has to get up there. And one final thought on Chris Bosh, and this kind of gets back to what you were just saying. It's what type of life lesson is it that we're going to disparage or underappreciate someone who was willing to sacrifice? Like, how? What does that say? The fact that he doesn't get that sort of recognition. Yet whenever LeBron and Dwyane Wade stepped off the floor, he was perfectly capable of stepping up and being the number one guy. In Toronto, he had nobody with him, and he still was able to do great things there. So, I just hate this idea that, we say all the time that guys need to be willing to sacrifice. That he is the perfect example of somebody who sacrificed and changed his game. The guy never shot three-pointers until he got hurt in the playoffs. Right. He comes back, all of a sudden he can make corner threes, and you go on and win a championship. Like, what type of an example does this set? And the last thing I want to say about that,
sure.
You mentioned about riding the coattails and things like that. How many championships did LeBron have before he joined Chris Bosh and Dwyane Wade? Dwyane obviously had the one, playing with Shaq, and Dwyane was the central figure during the playoffs on those teams. You talk about Phil Jackson. How many championships did Michael Jordan have before Phil Jackson got there? I feel like there's such an underappreciation of players who are able and coaches who are able to get guys to the next level.
It's a team sport. It's a team sport. Can you be a team player? That's what means the most. That's why some have always put aside Will Chamberlain, those who haven't won championships. But Chris did it alone in Toronto, did it as part of an ensemble with the Heat, started as a power forward, became a center, as an inside player, became a mid-range shooter, then in the three-point shooter, constantly evolved and continues to evolve. And the real shame of this all, Clay, to sort of sum this up, is that at 37, by all rights, he still should be playing. But because of the blood clots isn't. He is a young man with so much more ahead of him. Chris Bosh's greatest moment might still be to come.
So anyway, Chris Bosh, thank you for making us smarter. Thank you for making me smarter. Doing something that only Ira Winderman can do, which is make me smarter on a week-to-week basis.
Well, or otherwise pumping up with the steroids to try to keep up with the kids. But that's another story for another day.
Check Ira for HGH. Check us out again next week right here on Inside the Paint. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro, exclusively on the Big O Radio Show. Search Big O Radio Show on most platforms. Subscribe and smash the like button to support Inside the Paint. If you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business, there's only one choice: Pallet Rack City.